may your grief and pain so affect me that if you go hungry, I will not be able to eat. Now let someone invent a new religion which teaches people to be human. 2002, when I happened to be on leave from the civil service, you're allowed to work in an international organization and in development organizations. I was with ActionAid, and I was working on the earthquake, etc. So I thought this was a riot and I'd go and do humanitarian work, because people don't tend to do humanitarian work in human-made conflicts. And within a day or two, I could immediately made out that this is not a riot by any extreme, in any sense of imagination. It is a state-sponsored massacre of the most brutal kind, of the most brazen kind as well. And therefore, I wrote my first piece. I said I had to say this to the world, so I wrote something, and within a few days, the Times of India published it. Cry My Beloved Country, I called it. And then I realized that this was a battle that one needed to fight independently. So I quit the civil service a few days later. The last 10 years, this has been one of the things that has dominated my life. I keep going back to sites, and just to complete, sorry, this is a somewhat long introduction, but I have been going back to Gujarat these 10 years, but I have been going to these sites of these other massacres that I spoke about, particularly Nelly and Bhagatpur and the victims in Gujarat, in Delhi, the widows. And one thing that strikes me is that the suffering doesn't go away. I went to Nelly on 25 years when it happened. They were longing for someone from outside to come, because nobody was even commemorating their suffering. And it was really like a small group gathered, and then one by one they would come, and one man said, I was just 7 years old and my entire family got wiped out. They got killed in front of me. You cannot imagine. He was now in his early 30s. You cannot imagine what it is like to live life with nobody. And then this other lady came and said, my child was on my lap, and this is how they cut him into pieces, and so on and so forth. And and it was 25 years had passed. And I go back again and again, and I feel that the rest of us forget and we move on. But those who have lived through that suffering, the wounds do not heal.
Do you feel that there's not enough of an audience, not enough of a platform, not enough of coverage for these issues? Do you often feel that?
Absolutely. I think that I've written many things. This book of mine is the least has been the least noticed and sold. Maybe it's not a good book, but maybe there are other reasons. I was curious that Penguin hasn't even brought it to this stall, although it's there. Okay, sorry, I was asking him. But by and large, I do find that this is something that we don't want to look into in the face. It is something that we like to forget. And a lot of my friends keep telling me, and I've said so in the book, that why are you constantly scraping old wounds? Why don't you allow people to forgive and forget? And I've argued here that in the absence of many things, including justice, it is impossible to forget.
I would like to read a little chapter from your book, a paragraph from your book, which I think crystallizes what you just said. I am convinced that the decision to close the past without looking back must not be imposed on the people who live not only with the memories of the trauma of unspeakable loss and violence, but the daily realities of continued persecution, fear and hate. The survivors of Gujarat should not feel coerced into a spurious amnesia imposed on them by those who did not suffer and by the absence of remorse and compassion. It is only when the survivors are able to deal voluntarily with this painful past, ably assisted by society and the state, that they will be able to look to the future with optimism.
So one of the first people who came to us was Wali Bhai. Now his story was that his house was burned by his own neighbors. He couldn't believe that the young men he'd seen growing up would set fire to his properties, and he was completely devastated, etc. And he wanted to fight the case, but the police wouldn't even register their names. And then once he said he'll fight the case, the elders of the village gathered and came in a delegation to meet him and called him Wali Kaka. He said they suddenly remembered that I was Kaka, and they said, these young boys who did this to you are like your own children. They grew up before you. Why don't you forgive them? And he replied, yes, they are like my children. They did grow up before my eyes. I want to forgive them. I have only one condition. Let's call a meeting of the village. Let those boys stand up and say they're sorry for what they did. And I will forgive them, and I promise you I will not pursue the case of legal justice after that. And they said, no, we'll give you money, we'll do everything, but they won't ask for forgiveness. He said, then come what may, whatever happens, I'm going to pursue this case. And so he gave his evidence. Those boys got arrested. They spent a few weeks in jail. And it was very interesting because they threatened him with boycott, and even the other 7 Muslim families in the village also said, we'll boycott you because you're making life difficult for us as well. And he was in this splendid isolation, one man and his old wife living alone. Nobody had any interaction with them, and he was completely elated. And I said, why? He said, now even if they hack me to pieces, I won't regret it because I feel restored as a human being. And I think we need to understand why justice is important.
Saying is that the thing about it's the rich trying to keep the poor poor. To the extent that the poor believe they're poor, it perpetuates the